There are places in history where no one should enter, not because they are forbidden, but because questioning them shatters everything we believe we know. It doesn't matter how many books you've read. It doesn't matter how many fossils you think you understand. It doesn't matter how secure our version of the past seems. One poorly framed question, and the entire story of humanity stops being linear. What if we weren't the first intelligent civilization to walk upon this planet? This isn't an assertion, it's an uncomfortable hypothesis. Some researchers and thinkers have wondered if a society long before our own didn't disappear due to a cataclysm, but simply left. And if that happened, then perhaps we are not their heirs. Perhaps we are the descendants of those who never abandoned the Earth. Today, we are not going to claim anything as fact. Today, we are going to explore questions that archaeology barely dares to ask. Hypotheses where there are no definitive proofs, silences where we would expect ruins, and a past that perhaps didn't end, it was just left behind. This is Impossible Horizon, and today you enter a frontier of history from which you do not return the same. The idea of a civilization prior to our own is not part of the scientific consensus. The official history is clear. Humanity spent hundreds of thousands of years as hunter-gatherer societies, and only very recently developed advanced technology. However, there exists an extreme, marginal, and deeply speculative hypothesis that some researchers and thinkers have cautiously raised: the possibility that hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago, a civilization could have existed with a level of development difficult to imagine today. We don't know if that civilization reached industrial technology, spaceflight, or something else entirely. We don't know how it was organized, how long it lasted, or if it truly existed at all. And that is precisely where the problem begins. Because if such a thing had happened, an inevitable question arises: why don't we find clear traces? This baffling void has been given a name: the Great Archaeological Silence. Archaeology has reconstructed the last few thousand years of human history in great detail, but when we go back further, the record becomes fragmentary, eroded, incomplete. We are not saying there is hidden evidence. We are pointing to an absence and wondering if that absence is because there was never anything there, or because deep time erases almost everything. This is not a story of certainties. It is an exploration of uncomfortable questions, of hypotheses we cannot prove, but cannot entirely dismiss either. Our civilization is young, and yet it is already leaving a deep and almost impossible to hide footprint. In barely 2 centuries of industry, we have altered the planet in ways that will remain recorded for millions of years. Layers of plastic embedded in sediment, anomalous concentrations of metals, radioactive isotopes from nuclear tests, and a clear chemical signature that future geologists will identify without difficulty. Now, when we look back into deep time, the record seems surprisingly clean. We find no remains of global infrastructure. There are no ancient industrial layers. There are no unequivocal traces of a previous technological civilization. And therein lies the paradox. If an advanced civilization had existed hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, how is it possible that almost nothing remains? One speculative hypothesis suggests that a highly advanced society might have learned to minimize its environmental impact, recycling its materials almost completely and avoiding long-lasting waste. Another possibility is even simpler and less conspiratorial. Deep time is brutally effective at erasing footprints. Plate tectonics recycle the Earth's crust. Erosion destroys structures. Volcanism buries entire regions. Oceans cover and hide continents for entire eras. On scales of millions of years, even entire cities could disappear, leaving no more trace than a vague mineral anomaly. None of this proves that a previous civilization existed, but it does show something important. The absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence when we are talking about extreme geological time.
The archaeological silence is not a confirmation. It is an open question.
When such an extreme hypothesis is raised, the question is inevitable. Is there any kind of physical evidence to support it? The honest answer is uncomfortable. There is no conclusive proof, but there are anomalies that some consider worthy of cautious discussion. One of the most cited concepts is the so-called OOP-arts, out-of-place artifacts, objects whose dating or context seems strange. Most of these cases have been explained, misinterpreted, or directly dismissed by science. Still, some examples continue to be debated, not as proof of a lost civilization, but as reminders of how incomplete the archaeological record can be. Then there are the megalithic structures, not as evidence of advanced technology, but as legitimate questions regarding the capabilities of ancient societies. Göbekli Tepe, for example, forces a rethink of the classical chronology. It is a monumental complex built by communities that, according to what we thought we knew, did not yet practice large-scale agriculture. It doesn't prove an advanced civilization, but it does indicate that our understanding of the human past remains provisional. The pyramids of Giza show astronomical alignments and a constructive precision that is still being studied. We know who built them and when, but the level of social organization and knowledge required continues to raise legitimate questions. And places like Pumapunku or Baalbek present blocks of extreme size and weight whose transportation and placement are still discussed from a technical point of view without the need to resort to extraordinary explanations. None of this proves that a previous advanced civilization existed, but it does make one thing clear. The human past is not fully understood. These structures are not answers, they are question marks carved in stone. And in a scenario where time erases almost everything, open questions deserve to be treated with rigor, not with rushed certainties.
When physical evidence is not conclusive, many turn their gaze toward another type of record: ancient accounts. It is important to set a clear boundary here. Myths are not historical documents in the strict sense. They are symbolic, cultural narratives passed down through generations. Still, some authors have wondered if certain myths might contain distorted echoes of very ancient real events, not as literal chronicles, but as memories reinterpreted through language, religion, and human imagination. In ancient Sumer, for example, the Anunnaki appear. To conventional archaeology, they are mythological gods linked to the order of the world and agriculture. However, some have reinterpreted them as figures who descended from the sky, a speculative reading that lacks academic backing, yet continues to spark questions about how ancient cultures explained the origin of knowledge. In the Vedic texts of India, Vimanas are mentioned, described as flying vehicles within epic contexts. The dominant interpretation understands them as symbolic or poetic elements, although certain authors have chosen to see in them exaggerated descriptions of technology. Again, there is no proof of this, only interpretations. Something similar occurs with the Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Maya, where the creation of human beings appears as a process of trial and error. Some read it as a philosophical allegory, others as a cosmogonic myth, and a few as a metaphor for lost knowledge. The key here is not to decide which interpretation is correct. The key is to recognize that we don't know. We don't know if these accounts describe real technology, poorly understood natural phenomena, or simply the human way of explaining the incomprehensible with the narrative tools available. Myths prove nothing, but they do show that for millennia, humanity has felt that its origin might be more complex than it appears at first glance. And that echo, however distorted, continues to resonate. If we accept, purely as a mental exercise, the possibility of a previous advanced civilization, the next question arises naturally. Why would they have abandoned the Earth? This is not an assertion, but rather a reasoned speculation. One possibility is large-scale climate change. The Earth has gone through global glaciations, periods of extreme heat and profound environmental transformations.
A technologically advanced civilization might have reached ecological limits that were difficult to reverse. Another option is planetary catastrophe, massive impacts, prolonged volcanic activity, or geological instability, events capable of making life on the surface unviable for thousands of years. There is also the hypothesis of voluntary expansion. A society with advanced knowledge might have viewed Earth as a point of origin, not a final destination, not out of necessity, but for exploration, migration, or long-term survival. This is where the Kardashev scale often appears, a theoretical model that classifies civilizations based on their energy use. But it is worth emphasizing, it is only a conceptual framework, not a historical roadmap. As for possible destinations, some ancient traditions mention constellations like Orion or specific stars. From a scientific point of view, there is no evidence connecting those accounts to an actual exodus. They are symbols, not maps. We don't know if anyone left. We don't know if there was a where. But raising the question serves to understand something deeper. If a civilization reaches an extreme technological level, its decisions cease to resemble our own, and that makes the silence, far from being proof, remain an open mystery.
Having reached this point, the question no longer looks only at the past. It looks at us. The human brain poses an enigma that is difficult to ignore, not because it is perfect, but because it seems capable of far more than what is strictly necessary for basic survival. Abstract mathematics, music, theoretical physics, the ability to imagine realities we have never seen. Some have suggested, with great caution, that this capacity could be a strange inheritance, a cultural or biological vestige of something that came before. Others, the majority, explain it as the natural result of evolution, a brain that expanded due to social pressure, language, cooperation, and adaptation. There is no absolute consensus and no definitive answer. What we do know is that human history shows a curious pattern. For hundreds of thousands of years, progress was extremely slow. And then, in a very recent period, a cultural and technological explosion occurred, almost abruptly. That proves nothing by itself, but it does invite us to wonder why a species spends so much time in apparent stagnation and then advances so quickly. Are we the inevitable result of evolution, or a unique combination of unrepeatable circumstances? Perhaps we are not anyone's heirs. Perhaps we are just an extraordinary coincidence. But even coincidences, when they are so improbable, deserve to be observed with attention.
In recent years, one topic has returned to public debate with more force than ever: UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. It is important to start with the only thing we know for certain. UAPs exist as real observed phenomena. They have been recorded by military sensors, radars, pilots, and infrared systems. That does not imply that we know what they are. We don't know their origin, we don't know their nature, and for now, we don't know if they are related to human technology, unknown natural phenomena, or something else entirely. This is where a marginal hypothesis appears, one not accepted by conventional science, which raises the possibility that some of these phenomena could be observation systems, not as manned craft, but as probes, autonomous devices, or artifacts designed to collect information. This idea lacks solid evidence. It is a speculation that moves on the fringes of current knowledge, but it arises for a specific reason. Some UAPs seem to display behaviors that are difficult to fit into known technologies, such as extreme accelerations, changes in direction without apparent inertia, or an absence of visible aerodynamic surfaces. Even so, the most honest explanation remains uncertainty. Many cases end up having conventional causes that were misinterpreted. Others remain open simply because the data is incomplete.
If a previous civilization had existed, something we cannot assert, the idea that they left behind surveillance systems would be only one possibility among many and not necessarily the most likely one. For now, the most rigorous position is clear. We don't know who controls these phenomena, we don't know what they are, and we don't know if they hold any deeper meaning. But their existence reminds us of something important. Our knowledge of the world and of the sky is still far from complete. And within that margin of the unknown, the questions remain open.
At the end of this journey, the initial question remains standing. Perhaps there never was a civilization prior to our own. Perhaps human history is exactly as we understand it today, with all its gaps explained by erosion, time, and chance. Or perhaps not. The possibility, only as a possibility, that something occurred before us confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. Our knowledge of the deep past is limited, not for a lack of scientific effort, but because the planet we live on is extraordinarily efficient at erasing its own history. Tectonics recycle continents, oceans swallow entire coastlines, time flattens mountains and dismantles cities. On scales of millions of years, even a global civilization could be reduced to little more than geological noise. That doesn't mean we should fill the gaps with imagined certainties. It means we must learn to live with honest uncertainty. Maybe we will never know if there was someone before us. Maybe we will never know if someone left, or if all that we are is the improbable result of a chain of coincidences that will never be repeated. What we do know is this: we are a young civilization, looking beyond our own horizon for the very first time. And now we ask ourselves questions that other species, in other times, perhaps also asked, or perhaps they didn't. If a first civilization ever existed, its greatest legacy would not be ruins or machines, but the reminder that nothing is eternal, not even intelligence. And if it didn't exist, then our responsibility is even greater, because perhaps we are the planet's first attempt, and we still don't know if we will also be its last. This was Impossible Horizon, a space to explore questions that have no easy answers, and to remember that mystery is not an enemy of knowledge, but its starting point.